Good afternoon and welcome to Unifying Disparate Patient Data for a Complete Consumer Picture and Enhanced Patient Engagement, a health system CIO production sponsored by Verato. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments anytime in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Dr. Naveen Maram, Chief Data Officer with Ardent Health, Laura Fultz, VP Applications and Digital Experience with Emory Healthcare, and Joaquim Neto, Chief Strategy Officer with Verato. And then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. Naveen, can you start off by giving us an overview of your organization and your role?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. So, founded in 2001, Ardent Health is spread across 6 states with 30 hospitals, plus 200 sites of care, around 1,800 plus aligned providers, and 24,000 caregivers. My role, I'm the Chief Data Officer with also accountability now with AI. So that's in brief about me and our organization.
Excellent. Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, hi everyone. Emory Healthcare is an 11 hospital healthcare system based out of the Atlanta, Georgia area. We have nearly 500 provider locations and 70 different subspecialties and close to 25,000 employees. We're the largest academic medical institution in the state. My role, I'm the Vice President of Applications and Digital Experience. So that includes all healthcare apps as well as our user experience team, which this group focuses on evaluating and measuring the user experience, both patients and employees.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. Joaquim?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Joaquim Neto with Verato. We were founded about 10 years ago, and we're focused sort of solely on the topic of today, which is working with health systems and other organizations to create a single source of truth for what we call for identity intelligence. And so I'm very much looking forward to getting the details with the august members of the panel here.
All right, excellent. Let's jump right in. And Naveen, we're going to start with you. How does your organization's strategic vision for patient engagement influence your approach to unifying data across disparate systems?
Yeah, this is a great question, Anthony. I think this is probably many of the organizations are in similar boat as us. So given that we operate across 6 states, there is significant variation in the needs of the local population and how we are set up as organization. So to step back a little bit from the core theme of your question, at a macro level, Ardent has grown through mergers and acquisitions. So that kind of sets the stage for how we are evolving from more of a, for lack of a better term, a holding company into an operating company. So there's different ways we have delivered care across multiple sites, multiple states, strong local presence. So without losing that personalized touch that exists locally, how do we start taking advantage of the scale and efficiency is foundation for us? So in fact, part of my role came from that I'm the first Chief Data Officer for Ardent, which kind of implies there is a growing recognition in the organization about the value of data and how it can drive transformative experiences for patients, consumers, providers across the spectrum. And so that's our starting point for like that strategic vision. So going now to the driving the engagement, we have, I guess, like Laura, maybe you'll jump in on this later, more than 500 plus applications that are kind of providing different types of services for the organization. And each one may touch a different data domain, if you will, like some are touching provider, some are touching a patient, but most of them are going to cross multiple domains. It's very hard to say this app only produces, consumes, leverages one type of data. A lot of them are going to drive across the spectrum. Some are homegrown, some are vended, some are legacy, if you will, some are SaaSified. So being able to kind of understand the digital trail that's being left by each of these, how to tap into it, how to harness that, to drive those engagement, because our patients are much more savvy now, our consumers are much more savvy. On the retail side, they're getting experiences that they're naturally turning inwards and saying, why can't I get it from my healthcare? Well, we know the reasons and we are trying to get there, but that's kind of the foundation for how do we take all of this, connect these. It's not just collecting information or data, but also connecting them in ways that it would make sense in a more holistic way. As we talk about longitudinal patient records or consumer 360s, that's kind of the foundation for driving that use cases around why we want to unify data across these systems.
All right, great. Yeah, and as you said, we'll dig into lots of this stuff as we go forward. Laura, your thoughts?
Yeah, so one of our foundational objectives is to deliver the right data to the right people at the right time, right? So Emory Digital, which is our IT group, recently evaluated and developed its strategic plan for the next several years. But what we did first is we went through an exhaustive study of the business capabilities that Emory Healthcare needed to be successful. So that generated a capability model, which we then overlaid with the existing applications in our portfolio. And that showed us where we had some white space and where we had some red, a lot of redundant or duplicate systems. And so we're currently undergoing an application rationalization project to eliminate that surplus of redundant systems. And so that led us to a platform and experience-based portfolio of projects laid out for the next couple of years. And part of that plan is to build a unified data platform that aggregates data from all of these different systems. So again, the application rationalization is a critical component of that to eliminate some of those extra systems and really identify single sources of truth to generate that best user experience.
So, Laura, let me just follow up with you because that's very interesting. That makes a ton of sense what you did, saying, let's not start with the technologies we have. Let's start with the experience we want to give our users. So if we could be anything we want to be, here's the kind of information we would be able to aggregate and provide. And then you said, okay, now we have the vision of what we want to do. What technologies do we have to make this a reality? Where are we missing things and where do we have duplicates? Um, can you tell me more about about executing on that, about getting that done? It sounds like it would take a lot of people and it would take a long time and it would be a very intensive project that you'd really have to dedicate resources to.
It was. And so it took us maybe 6 months. We did have some help with some folks from the outside that came in because it was a lot of interviewing our stakeholders and understanding. And that's where we were finding applications that we didn't even know existed, right? And so we were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was here. So it was a lot of work and it covered the entire department, plus our operational friends, as I mentioned. And so, but so worth it. And so we're looking at reducing our application portfolio by hundreds and hundreds. And then adding to where we saw on the capability model where we did have white space or we needed more attention to areas that were critical to our strategic vision. We said we need to double down there and we need to look at where are some of the industry leaders and do some investment. And then here's some areas that we can thin out because we're doing the same thing over and over again.
Really good stuff. Joaquin, what are you thinking about what you're hearing?
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I'm really interested that you sort of the conversation, both Naveen and Laura, you sort of talk about the patient experience side of things driving these sort of platform decisions. So, there's lots of reasons why an organization, when we're talking to the health systems, there's lots of reasons why you might go invest in sort of a unified patient data platform, unifying data across different silos of data. There's all kinds of different departments benefit from that, from, billing departments to the clinical and direct clinical impact, of course. But we really are seeing that organizations that are really moving now on this are thinking about the experience part of things. And I think that's just because of the climate and it's so competitive for patients. And as Naveen, what you said is there's me as a healthcare consumer myself, right? Like I want my health system to treat me like, other organizations I go to for services. And so it does seem like, now is the time and patient experience. I think we might talk about this a little bit later, but when it comes to sort of getting your organization rallied around something to make these infrastructure changes, that the patient experience driver is just sort of so tangible and you can really measure the impact, that it seems like that's just a precipitating force for a lot of this work. And that's what I'm hearing from both of you.
Very good. All right, let's jump into our next question. And we are going to go with Laura. We're going to start with you on this. How is your health system using unified patient data to improve outreach and engagement with patients, both current and prospective? And there's a big difference there. So, current and prospective are completely different. So your thoughts?
So improving our outreach and engagement, that's something that I think that all healthcare organizations are interested in, but we've really invested a lot of technology in the area over the past year as well. So we use CRM tools like Salesforce, and we're looking at our individual instances. We have many. And so looking at that, and also looking at integrating them within our EMR, but we're also currently implementing our EHR CRM system as well. So that would allow us to focus deeply on those clinically integrated journeys. And so it's hugely helpful. We can target specific patient populations with relevant information to help with their health goals. And within the EMR too, you can contact them directly through the portal or through an email. We've also invested in our CCaaS software, call center as a service, which I feel like sometimes is an area that not everybody focuses on, but it's our front door in many ways to patients. And so we are integrating our new CCaaS system directly with our EMR and improving upon that user experience, and the user being both the patient and the call center agent. So gone are the days when a call center agent doesn't know who they're talking to before they get on the phone. Now they're in a position to know who that patient is, how long have they been on hold, and then integrating with our EMR, we know some clinically relevant information for them. Things like, do they have an outstanding appointment that they need to schedule? Does that patient, we know who their PCP is, but we know that they like to go to this particular clinic and like Thursday morning appointments. And so it's really generating a much more personalized experience, which is particularly important, I think, at a large healthcare organization. So patients don't feel like just a number. They feel like, okay, these people know me. So again, it's all focusing back on that right information to the right people at the right time, which has really been a focus area for us.
Laura, how difficult is that ERM CRM integration?
It's still a work in progress. And so, especially with the CRM integration, and so with the Salesforce side of things, with Epic is our EMR. And so we're one of the first to integrate it with our Genesis software. And so far, so good. We're just really excited about the possibilities and what we see. We go live later in a couple months later this year. And so we are just thrilled at how this is going to change the user experience.
All right, very good. Naveen, let's go with you.
Great points, Laura. I think, a lot of the organizations are in similar journeys, maybe a little bit ahead in some, a little bit behind in certain areas. The data reflects either the chaos or the beauty that exists within a system, right? So we all start with good intention of starting an application to solve a problem. Lo and behold, it gets expanded into certain areas, but then as health systems grow, it gets disjointed. And that manifests in both of these, right? First talking about just current patients. How many times have you had a situation where a patient comes in and says, hey, my phone number changed? Just a very basic thing. And then the notification goes to the wrong one. They're coming back again and telling a simple thing. Hey, my number changed. I told you already. Health systems have a hard time reconciling it. In this day and age, that's very hard to fathom why. Knowing the complexity on the back end, we may have a better appreciation, but from a consumer and a patient standpoint, they're not too happy about very basic things, leave alone what feels like going to Mars experiences around, my call center is connected to my EMR. I can kind of share some of those things. So on one end, how do we get better at these simple things? If there is an update in one system, do we have a common way to recognize that this is what's going on? and like kind of propagate that, because you're a trusted source within the like islands of information that you have. And now you kind of move into the unauthenticated or prospective customers. It's even more wild west, right? Like, how do I know who you are? How do I give you the right services? There's a couple of interesting use cases. It's very interesting. We're talking about this right now. I was at Vive just last week, and one of the vendors was pitching about personalization as a feature, right? Like, around, but in healthcare, that gets very sensitive. If I don't know who you are, how can I personalize experiences for you? Right? Like, that's a very interesting space to be in. There's a very famous case study from Target when they did the marketing campaign, how far ahead they were of the consumer. And that led to some very interesting consequences, right? Like, so when we talk about prospective consumers, how do we make sure that, like, there is a balance we strike between what do I know about you, what experiences or services can I serve for you? Because there's a lot of external data we can bring to bear. And maybe at the census data, there's this block level information that we can take. And so tailoring of those experiences, Laura, I think you led with that, right? Like, what do we need to do? What services are our communities trusting us to provide as a starting point before we start blending them across multiple systems, right? Like, for one of our, I think our CMO actually, he uses Epic. The internal name he uses is that's our clinical operating system. And I kind of felt like, man, like, how can a technology be your operating system? But the more I understand it, the concept is like that becomes the world in which all our clinical people live. But if I were to contrast that with non-clinical, what does their world start to look like? It's wild west, truly wild west. There's tons of applications. There's tons of information that they have to process. So how do we start bringing it all, shaping it, and tailoring it in ways to support the roles that they're doing, ultimately, to drive patient or consumer experience? That is the challenge we have. And so what we have started, again, like, going back to my opening comments around starting to operate more as a operating company, is to kind of start thinking about, like, where are the places where we can start to focus more on platforms. So there are some investments that are being made around, like, consumer side. I think the Fivetran call centers, a few other things that have started to happen. We are also on a 5-year journey around our ERP modernization as a starting point. So looking at integrating those, I think, Laura, you guys may be a little bit ahead on those things. So, how do we start integrating those experiences into a unified view so that the call center view doesn't look different than a patient view? In a different role, we had this challenge where we created a brand new digital front door, but then patients were describing a different experience. What we found out was when they called the call center, the view that they had of the locations was different than what the patients would see on the front end, the consumers would see on the front end. So we had to go back and fix it. But those are examples of, like, simple things that, like, we miss as we roll out these large applications, but those integrations have to be right. And last but not the least, like, how do we avoid duplication and misidentifying folks? Like, how do I consolidate and create master records so that, like, I can make sure I'm attaching the right information to the right person as they go through different experiences and services is also the other one that we are trying to go after.
Well, Joaquin, I think he teed it up for you right there with the misidentified records. So wherever you want to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I might just start on, I mean, you mentioned sort of a little bit ago, sort of the challenge in finding the right balance as you're trying to provide the personalized experiences to your patients. What information do they want you to know about them, and how do they want you to use that? And that's something that, is, there's going to be a lot of focus on that, I think, in the next 5 years as we figure this out, especially with AI coming to fore. And, I win the bingo item for saying AI first.
Well done.
But seriously, there's gonna be a ton of investment there. And I do think that idea of having the right balance, like, consumers want you to know them, but they also don't want they don't want it to be creepy, right? And privacy is super important in this industry and always will be. So one of the things that does raise, and sort of where you left it off too, I think it is interesting that healthcare, we have made a lot of progress on, I think, unifying the patient records from a clinical perspective. Both your organizations, you're on Epic, and it sounds like you've done a great job getting a single clinical view and getting that dispersed. And so that's pretty amazing. And as sort of a consumer, I experienced that in my health system. But now that we're talking about this experience aspect and we're talking about the CRMs, we're talking about engaging people, not just patients that are coming to the health system, but prospective patients. And so that's where I think a lot of this will come to the fore if organizations are investing in marketing to people, right, to get them the right services. As a consumer, if I've never been to a health system, I think I'd expect sort of certain messaging. But if I'm a loyal member of your health system and I'm my primary care physician, I really like to go there, I don't want to receive a marketing message that acts like, they've never seen me before. And so that's to meet the expectations of the consumer, we do have to rationalize across kind of the clinical world and this consumer world. And I think one of the things that people are seeing is that the data in these systems is very different, right? So the data you collect during registration, give me my name and my birth date, that's the first thing you use all the time. That's not the same conversation you necessarily have if you're a marketing department and you're trying to do outreach to someone. Then I'm going to contact you by email and text, and it's different data elements, and there's a different amount of information that prospective customers, patients will provide to you than your existing patients. So it does raise all these sort of interesting technical challenges once we're starting to talk about converging this consumer world, consumer systems, and the clinical systems.
Yeah, I wonder if we need to just a little more touch on this idea of knowing a lot of information about a patient and communicating that to them without being creepy. I think that's been touched on. We referenced the Target scenario that happened where I think we know that was probably a little creepy to some people. Is that a concern, Laura? Is this something we want to be careful about in our outreach?
Have to be careful about it, but I think you also, patients are savvy and they know what information, they're typically providing you that information, right? And so it's not like the creepy factor gets into how did you know that about me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as long as you're transparent with that data collection and why you're doing it, that really helps. It is an interesting situation, Joaquin, you were talking about prospective patients versus clinical patients. And we've got, I've talked a lot about app rationalization, but I've also mentioned 2 different CMR systems, but where we're sort of drawing the line is on those clinically focused areas of where we're trying to target patients for a specific reason, maybe a cancer screening test or things like that. That's where the space was for us on our capability model and why we kind of justified, okay, there's a need for a different type of CRM that you're not going to get with a more marketing-based platform. And so we felt comfortable that there was room for both. But that's just how kind of we are going about it. I'm not sure, Naveen or Joaquin, what your thoughts are.
Naveen, anything you want to jump in there?
Yes. So Laura, I think, when you talk about harnessing and harvesting information that was already provided, historically, we may have left some information on the table. So if you have a patient who has come to you and has been your patient for like 15, 20 years, along the ways, they have shared lots of information. But given the way systems were, historically, we just used, hey, for this episode, for this visit, what do I need? And I kind of focused like that is like your 80, 90% use case. But now with AI and other technologies coming in, I can really go back like 20 years and connect the dots better. So you do need a trusted voice to help them understand, like, this is not information being pulled out of thin air. Instead, this is where the connections are being made is also an important factor for the patients to understand, like, this is coming from information I already gave, or like, another use case I can describe is like, there are multiple members of the family that are seeing different parts of your health system. Now, that also presents some interesting things, right? Like, when something happens with one part of the member of the family that wasn't shared by others, but your system knows that. What does that look like? Wife and husband go to the same provider. What happens then? So there are some interesting scenarios here around the existing patient community. Prospective is kind of where the wild, wild west starts coming in, right? Like I think, again, at Vive, they were showing some examples of where you're personalizing payer rates so much based on the behaviors of the consumers. Is that where would you draw the line? I think going back, Anthony, to your question, if I know all the things you do on Facebook, you're posting all of these things. On Instagram, you post. In Pinterest, you do these things. So what happens now if that can be leveraged by payers, by extension, that information is coming across. And so now I realize, like, my rates are up versus, like, the campaign that is being shared with Joaquin might be different than mine, even though we live in the same zip code. So it is definitely raising some very interesting questions that we all have to step back from the tech and the data side and focus more on the experience to say, just because we can, should we be doing it? What does this mean?
All right, very good, very good. Joaquin, let's start with you. And I want you to speak about this in a very general way. What specific interoperability challenges have you faced when integrating data from various EHRs, CRM systems, and outside sources, and how have you addressed them? So this would relate to what you're seeing from your customers, not what you're doing yourself. This is, Naveen talked about we're in a pretty good shape on the clinical side, but one of the reasons we're in a good shape is because everybody's gone on one system, at least as a core system, and either it's Epic or it's Oracle now, maybe a little Meditech, but that's why we're seeing it. It's not like we've seen this beautiful breakthrough in interoperability, HL7, or Fire and things like that, but not the end all be all. We've still got the problem that we don't have at home with our appliances, where you plug it into the same outlet. We're not there. Maybe we never will be. But anyway, what are your thoughts on sort of what's going on with integration out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Anthony, you're probably right. We did a great job of sort of consolidating onto individual EHR platforms for health system, and that raises other issues when there's M&A and organizations are acquiring new facilities and so forth. That creates projects, and you have to do migrations. And by the way, this idea of rationalizing your patient identity has to be done on that. The last thing you want to do is to jam a bunch of duplicate records into Epic because you acquired some new hospitals or something. So some of those challenges are still there. But I do think there are a lot of organizations are in a much better place with respect to that clinical stuff than 10 years ago. And I started to sort of touch on this when you're looking at the consumer data. I think it really is interesting to me, and it's I think news to folks that are just starting this journey of trying to manage the entire life cycle of data, right? Both sort of prospective patient and then continued patient engagement, is how different some of the data is in these other systems. Just think of it as the CRM versus the EHR. And oftentimes you have very few users in your organization that really have visibility into both of those data. So we're often working with customers, and there's just an assumption that, well, data is just data. And, my experts, I've developed a lot of expertise on patient data quality in my, HIMSS team, who's responsible for Epic data quality. And so they'll know what to do with my CRM and marketing data. And if you go look at that data, it looks very different. So, there's technical considerations there, but probably, I imagine for a lot of folks, on this webinar might not be as far along as Laura and Naveen, you all are, and having already decided to create a platform that you're going to build, use to connect all these different systems. I think there are some really interesting governance questions there, which is, okay, who from your organization is going to be involved in these decisions about what to do? How do I connect my CRM to my EHR? And there's different data elements, and how am I going to, confirm that it's trustworthy and things like that. So maybe I'm teeing up a question to both of you, which is sort of that governance side of things. There's some interesting technical challenges that I'd love to get into, but maybe the right starting point is, how do you think about that? Getting the HIM experts that you have to sort of talk to the data experts you have on maybe the marketing side or the engagement side.
And I think it's an interesting question. Let's start with you, Naveen. Governance, as Joaquin said, governance coming into play around integration.
Yeah, great point. I think so. Maybe let's unpack. When you say interoperability, there are a couple of flavors at least we can think about when it comes to healthcare. One is your syntactic interoperability. The other one is the semantic interoperability. So the place we are all landing on is more of the syntactic interoperability, right? Like, where I'm sending you messages, you get the messages, you acknowledge it. In certain cases, you understand what that means. So that's a good starting point. So when I go to single system, single EMRs, an Epic can talk to an Epic, so yeah, there is some validity there. But where we still have some significant gaps are in the semantic interoperability. What does it actually mean when a message sends me this? When the value is X, what does this mean? And then you get into the clinical side of this, which is in my organization, if it's greater than 6, whatever that value is, that means it's high. Whereas in your organization, that is medium, which then translates into what action I'm supposed to take or not supposed to take. Right. So there's a big space there. And maybe, Anthony, that's what you were referring to as it's very hard not to crack, just given the vastness of the knowledge that's coming through. I mean, now you talk about genomic data that's even more challenging to process. A lot of it is unstructured, not even semi-structured, right? Like, so how do you take all of this information, make some sense around it? So that's even within one system. And the other ones are on CRMs and other things too. So you need certain common identifiers, at least to be able to understand that this data is the same data. It's called X in HIM system. It's called Y in HR system. It's called Z in patient systems. So being able to at least say, this is kind of how I can attach. Can we even answer some very basic questions? How many patients do you have? Well, it depends. What do you mean it depends? Well, are you talking about like, what is the definition of a patient? Should they have X number of encounters? What is the time frame? How many consumers do you have? How many providers do you have? So all of these are depending on which system you're looking at, that could be a different way of answering it. And I think, having worked in many large organizations that are all over the spectrum in terms of maturity, very mature to getting started all the way, this is not an uncommon scenario for us to process. So the last part of your question, how have you addressed them? I think, how are we addressing might be a better way, because I don't think they've been fully addressed yet, right? Like, there are technologies that are making this a little bit more easier to understand, develop better awareness, so that now everybody starts to see the issue the same way. Previously, the challenges you were raising, Wakim, is like, hey, I have my team of people who can do it. I think I'm good. So explaining to them like, hey, this is why probably we are not good was a challenge, because it took a lot of effort. But now with some of the more unified systems, we can say, well, if it is good, why am I seeing this problem? Oh, that's interesting. So we are able to start converging on, okay, this data lives much beyond my own team, the system it produced. So how do we all become collective stewards of that? And so we are trying to address it. So technology is definitely one. Processes is definitely the other big lever that's underused. How those organizations come together. And that's where I think, the institutional differentiation starts to come. And academic medical centers have done a good job in some of the areas to be able to bring those expertise to bear and show the path, right?
Laura, let's talk a little bit more about that. This idea that Naveen brought up about understanding as a data user that other people in the organization using other applications are also leveraging the same data. And maybe we need to have a conversation with some governance involved around synchronizing or agreeing upon what data means what, because it's more than my department using it.
Not your
Talk about that
data.
issue.
Yeah, so I mean, I could talk about our governance model a little bit and how we address that. So we are an experience-led organization. I have it in my title, right? And so as a top of at the top of our governance model, we have experience councils, and I think there's 7 or 8. We have a patient experience care team, research, finance, et cetera, et cetera. And we co-chair that with operations. So I am the co-chair of the Patient Experience Council at our organization. And nearly everyone in that committee is on the operations team. And it spans, we have imaging, we have people from surgery, we have people from patient access. And so it really keeps us all connected, and it gives people a good forum to go to where we have to work out these situations. And so that's been really helpful. We also have a hub and spoke data model team. So we have a centralized data team, and they are responsible for the data management. So that's the ingestion, the curation, the cleansing. And that central team supports business analysts throughout the organization. And so the data is centrally managed by our team, but the visualization is performed in the spokes. And so I think through all of that collaboration, we give people a forum to know where to go to. And so, we're all talking together. You're not getting into those situations where people are like, this is mine, and I'm going to go out and buy this system, et cetera, et cetera. It's really working with operations in a centralized way with an experience-led focus that's been pretty helpful for us.
Excellent. Joaquin, any thoughts on anything?
Yeah, no, that's terrific. I think just this idea that, organizations that have had this experience initiative. And I know, that sort of like Naveen said, we work with organizations that are lots of different places along the maturity spectrum. And that's good. When we see organizations that have someone that has a title, where you're experienced, like there's been sort of a commitment made to that. That clearly that helps get things moving. Having this central organization that can look after the needs of these different constituents, again, because they are very different from, even though they're going to come together in the end, sort of the people and the expertise and the systems involved in the clinical versus the consumer side of things are very different. So I know anytime that we encounter organizations that have sort of made the decision to say, look, it's sometimes it's a data perspective. So, right, being the chief data officer, more and more healthcare organizations have chief data officers now. Maybe not all, but a lot. And then same on the experience side of things. And so it just seems that like a very critical part to getting this governance right is, you've got someone, an executive that's responsible for that. And you can make to really help getting people working across the organization.
Naveen, I just want to jump in and ask you a question. Here's something that's been coming up with some of my interviews. The importance, obviously everybody's been talking about generative AI. You were at Vive, I was at Vive, and a huge theme of the conversations. And one of the main points was that, your AI is only going to be as good as the underlying data. So now we're seeing we know there's a real deep, or there should be a very deep connection between AI and data. What are your thoughts around that? And in terms of health systems structuring their C-suite, we've seen chief AI officers. You're a chief data officer. I think I've seen chief AI and data in the same title, which makes a heck of a lot of sense to me. But what are your thoughts around that? Do you have a chief AI officer at Ardent? How do you make sure that stays well connected? Or is that going to be added to your title soon?
Yeah, it was actually added. We didn't update it.
Oh, look at this. Oh my. That wasn't a setup, folks. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think they're highly integrated, and I think these are very early days. We are seeing pockets of excellence when it comes to applying AI in certain use cases, but very quickly, what organizations are noticing is like can we scale it, either the same capability to the entire enterprise, or like take those and apply other places. That's where the challenge is starting to happen. Number one is if you don't have strong foundational things around data governance, all of those basic things, then it is going to catch up. And you're going to start seeing those in the form of delayed pilots. Your pilots are running forever. The value is not showing up from what your original assumptions were. That's not to take away the value of AI. It's just more around there is more value at this point in time to be getting AI ready, because AI is not just about data, process, people. Just because you have good insights, because you can ultimately, that action is still being taken, has to be taken by an individual. So what does it mean for them? I mean, with agentic and some of that stuff, it is starting to evolve. But you look at it, it's assisted and augmentation at this point. I think we are a little bit away from autonomous type of things that are going on. So all of this is predicated on having good data, trusted data. I was just having a conversation with our board member on this particular topic where they were like, how would I know when we have arrived? And the answer is, I don't think there's a mathematical way, as much as it's experiential. As a patient, you're coming in, a lot of times you're being asked, is it okay if we use AI tools, which is becoming more and more common when it comes to providing ambient type of capabilities. Now, on the other side, while providers on one hand are enjoying the FaceTime that they're able to do with it, what happens when the note has something that they did not, the patient did not say, nor the provider noticed? What happens then? As much as you're doing all these different techniques to lower the hallucination and some of those aspects, those notes can run really long. They're very detailed. We love it. So what happens the first time somebody is going to get in trouble for creating some stuff? There's some very interesting scenarios, right? So that whole idea of data validation, the accuracy of data is super important. to get the best value out of the front end capabilities you're putting in, whether that's embedded AI capabilities or homegrown, because sometimes you have that expertise, deep expertise that you want to deploy and serve the communities.
Yeah, Naveen, I was just gonna follow up with that. I think just with the adoption of AI, there's gonna be so much focus on the accuracy and the quality and sort of the transparency and just getting people on board to trust it. And there's some use cases where people trust it already and it's great. And then that's gonna evolve over time. More and more use cases will be adopted. But I just think there's so much gonna be emphasis on, can I trust that? How do I get my organization to trust it? That the last thing you want to do is be feeding in questionable data, into the AI agent. And so, if it's anything that's patient centric and patient oriented, you're going to want to have that running on top of a high quality, trusted, unified patient 360.
Right.
You don't want that running on a patient 180 and half the information that the AI needs to make the right decision isn't there. So and you kind of alluded to this point too. I think a lot of people recognize that how transformative AI is going to be, and they know it's going to be built on top of the platforms they're laying out now. So really investing in getting those platforms to be high quality and trusted is going to help in the end your AI initiative be adopted and sort of do everything you want.
So Laura, one of the other big things coming out of the recent discussions and conferences and such is don't do AI for AI's sake. Find your problem, and perhaps, and then there's a whole different conversation about different types of AI, which is traditional AI, people call machine learning, generative AI, and Naveen mentioned agentic AI, which is really sort of cutting edge. I don't know how much is actually going on the ground with that, but so if we're not going to take it and start with it as a premise, but you mentioned, there's some white space sometimes in your application coverage. There's some opportunities. You do want to look at problem areas or areas where things are manual or slow and say, could one of these AI solutions be brought to bear here? So that's also incumbent on people to be responsible. You don't want to do it for the sake of it, but you don't want to not be using it where it can help. What are your thoughts?
Oh, it's very true. And just our structure at Emory Healthcare, so we've had both a combination role of chief data and AI officer, and now we've split. So reminder that we are Emory Healthcare, but we're also Emory University. And so we've recently done something somewhat unique, and we have brought both of those IT organizations together. And so it's a lot of space to cover, but we feel like the focus on AI is enough that it needs a dedicated chief officer to oversee that with their team. And we've got a governance model. It is really the same governance model that we have with everything, but we have a focus just on AI with our operational users where they can go to talk about the needs. So we're not doing things just to do things. Another interesting point, we talked about verification of the data, is we went live with an LLM that we built, I think it was last week. We call it MChat. And so it's a combination of 3 different data sources. It's our policy management system. It's our EMR's kind of education and training materials. And it's also got clinical decision support content. And that has merged, and there's a chat bot that allows people to search, what is our policy? What is the protocol for X? It's about 8,000, I think, different documents, and it has reduced the time for reviewing policy and procedure information by 85%. So the reason I bring it up is that it literally in the tool, it has a trust but verify aspect to it. So it shows the answer, but then it asks the user, was this correct? Do you agree with that? And so that helps build that trust factor up. And it's something we're pretty excited about.
Oh, great. Excellent. We have an audience question come in that I want to put in front of the panel. Laura and team have made this webinar very helpful. Laura and team. The maturity of your interoperability with ERP, ERM, and CRM, EMR and CRM systems makes the patient experience aspect of healthcare really useful. How do you normalize your data to get all these systems harmonized on behalf of the patient? I'd have to start with the data guy, Naveen. How do you normalize the data to get the systems harmonized, which is, that goes to the interoperability. We touched on that a bit, but anything more you want to add?
I think at a foundational level, it comes down to what is the context we want to provide, right? I think, Joaquin, you mentioned that patient 360 type of a model. So when we talk about each application comes with its own data model, if you will, to support the transactions that are necessary to drive it. You have to kind of take that, translate that, and say, how do I then create a unified data model to support multiple use cases? That's where that interoperability piece becomes a big factor. Some of the elements in that application data model may be unique for transactions, so we can ignore those when you create that unified model, or you may need it to, depending on what is the use case. So leveraging external, now healthcare has gone a lot better, a lot farther with some of the standards bodies, right? You have SNOMED's adoption has gone quite a bit, quite deep. FHIR is also helping in a big way, but they're all still on a journey as far as being able to take advantage of all of these things. But ultimately, it comes down to what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the experience you want to provide, and what information you need, and that gets translated into the data sets. So that information model could be the glue that starts bringing together multiple applications.
Laura, anything you want to jump in there?
That's right on. And the only thing I can add is what we're doing specifically at Emory. So we've decided to move forward with Microsoft Azure and their cloud-based stack for our UDP. And we use their medallion approach where we have kind of the raw data in that bronze layer, and then it's transformed and cleaned in the silver and aggregated in the gold layer. And that's where we're running predictive models and analytics off of. And so that's where we're moving. So we're moving our applications to the cloud. We're doing that application rationalization that I mentioned earlier, and then also working with the Azure cloud stack as our data source.
Yeah, that's great. Laura. I was just going to say, I think I've just seen a lot of success in customers. I think this whole, new data architecture, whatever we're going to call it, Lakehouse, Medallion, that the whole new approach really is making this problem. It's not solving this problem, but it's allowing us to make progress as we solve the problem. So that simple idea that, yeah, you can bring all your data into this raw layer and you just get it in. There isn't a dependency on solving every semantic interoperability problem there is with every data element across your organization. You can get it into sort of the raw, and then you can get it into the next layer, harmonized enough to meet the use case that you're trying to meet today. And that's from an identity perspective, that's sort of where we usually see patient identity fitting in. It's okay, get into that silver layer, whatever you call it, and now you can go, that's harmonized. And then as you go further upstream, you start to solve more use cases, you can do more. So I just think that whole architecture that you've adopted, Laura, and lots of other organizations are adopting with various vendors, is helping us get through this problem of this interoperability problem, while also being able to make progress and just solve real problems that we're seeing every day.
So if I can add one thought, Laura, to what you said, this is still an emerging concept, still very minority, but they're coming up with the idea that maybe we don't need to model information as we had to do in the past, or when you talk about enterprise architecture patterns and things like that. Instead, take advantage of some of the Gen AI type of capability, right? You use natural language interpretation, because you can consume all of this information that's sitting out there and just answer it in the context. Now, since it's very premature, there's still some challenges around, does the Gen AI really get it? Because if you're doing these on low impact cases, that's okay. But when you're trying to say, this is my gateway for providing unified experiences, you want to be super confident about those capabilities. But that's another thought around how you can now start to normalize, but not, the trade-off is you need a lot more time to create the normalization that unifies data across multiple systems. That expertise is very specialized. It's hard to come by. So there is some augmentation that Gen AI can provide as you think about your medallion architecture and kind of blending it inside that.
Excellent. Good stuff. All right. Let's do a little Ask a Co-Panelist and see what we come up with. Joaquin, I'm going to let you start. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
That's great. I do. It's probably for both. Maybe I'll start with Laura. I'm just curious. So you talked a little bit before about the decisions your team made around CRM and which CRMs to use and for different purposes and so forth. This whole experience conversation, we talk with a lot of folks who are looking outside of healthcare. Organizations outside of healthcare have spent decades implementing customer data platforms and having customer-centric activities. And so I see a mix of some folks who are really kind of looking outside of healthcare. What have other industries done? But then there's also things are different in healthcare. So I'm maybe starting with you, Laura. I'm just curious how you thought about it. Did you think about when you were doing the experience initiative, how much did you look to other industries for learnings or not?
We absolutely look outside the industry because, quite frankly, I think our industry is behind. And so the president of our physician division, I've known for a number of years and would frequently remind me of the delta.com website and how it is a single pane of glass. But behind that pane of glass, there are hundreds of applications working together harmoniously that the end user has absolutely no idea about. And so and I am proud to say that we now have an application. It's our digital front door. I know that's a buzzy term, but our entryway as an app called My Emory Health, that is our singular point of reference. And so we absolutely, I think, need to look out of our industry to see they're doing it right. And so how can we then put that, because healthcare is different, and so it's not always transferable, but where can we take the good from these other areas and then improve what we're doing in healthcare? So that's a great question.
Naveen, anything you want to add?
Yeah, that was one of the data points I did have, Laura, was Delta's overall approach. I don't know, during COVID, this is an interesting anecdote. They were running short of, I think, in a capital. So they found that the SkyMiles program was far more valuable than the entire part of the industry, flying airplanes, their airplanes, everything included. So that's your use case around data monetization, that the information they have around SkyMiles, what they've been able to do around providing experiences and making it invaluable has been critical. The one maybe thing I want to caution us is there are certain constraints in healthcare that other industries won't have. So we also have to balance expectations around when we take a look at it. Hey, I can do this on Amazon, I can do this on X. Why can't I do it in healthcare? Healthcare is a highly regulated industry, so there are certain constraints we do have to operate under, but that doesn't take away the onus on us to provide a better experience because it's very personal. We want to provide those moments of experience at the most vulnerable times, right? So I just want to kind of call that out.
Perfect. Naveen, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, maybe just a general observation, right? Like in the light of all the technology trends we've been talking about, and both of you have been in the industry long enough, how have you seen things evolve from the innovation side, the adoption of innovation? Are you seeing more openness in certain areas or barriers more broadly, especially with an eye on the reimbursements are tightening in healthcare? So the cost of innovation is going up. So can you speak a little bit about how has that affected or how have you navigated those? Maybe Laura, will start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a tough question. I mean, there's an openness. I do think it helps that we've sort of landed on a couple key EMRs, right? And then we interface to those. And so that's been helpful. So there's not all these different disparate systems out there. And these EMRs can do more and more, right? And so they're coming at different niche systems every day. And so I think you've got to be careful. You got to balance that though, right? Because you want to have a blended portfolio, and you want to, again, getting back to the experience, want to have the best experience. Our sort of rule of thumb is if our EMR can get us 70 to 80% of the way there, we're going to stick with them. But there are situations where, that's not a service that they provide, or it's not a service that they provide well enough for the capabilities that we're trying to achieve to. So I think there is an openness, and I think that is why that we've gotten some benefit in some of these big EMRs out there.
Joaquin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think, and I've been doing this a lot longer than I want to admit, probably, but I think when we just went the shift to the EHRs, 15 years ago, I think that took a lot longer than people thought it was going to take, or it just took a long time. Say that. So it's been a big effort for organizations really to get to get to the point where the AMR is totally adopted and across the organization, and it's one or it's a few. And I feel like that just took a long time. And then it's been very recently that people have kind of been able to lift their heads up, and that there's been so much technology change recently to take advantage of, that the opportunity is there and the appetite is there. And I think we've also, people figured out how to sort of, you sort of reap the benefits of some of the new innovative things that we can do. But at the same time, a lot of these things help improve the efficiency of operations of the health systems and costs and so forth. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of get win-wins, reduce the cost of the organizations because everyone under pressure, but also achieve some new things, experience and so forth. So yeah, I feel like there's a great appetite for innovation these days.
All right, let's do what we call a lightning round of final thoughts before I let you guys go. So maybe 30 seconds. Let's frame it up this way. We've been really talking about providing a great patient experience, patient engagement, the challenges under the hood of having disparate applications, doing that. What's your best piece of advice around this issue to someone in your position at a comparably sized health system? Laura, we're going to start with you.
Make sure you're showing tangible value to your customers, and whether that be patients or clinicians or, most importantly, not most importantly, but leaders. And you've got to do that on a routine basis. So we are fortunate enough to have a chief financial informatics officer that's helps with our benefit realization model. And one of the things that she does, she's a surgeon, she works really closely with operations, but also finance. And so they jointly come together to put together an ROI. So we're not having to sell it to say, hey, this is a great project. We swear we'll make 10 million, give us funding. We're building that together with the operational team and finance. And we have found that has been much more effective for us to get reinvested back in. And it's really viewed us as a value center versus a cost center.
Well, that's excellent piece of advice. Naveen?
Oh man, Laura, I think you took the words out of my mouth around those concepts. So that is so true. I think, the only advice I can think of is every organization is unique. So while the tools are getting commoditized, if you think about it like recipe and ingredients, what ingredients would be needed to deliver on what recipe that your organization is interested in? I think, that's going to be where your differentiation shows up, how your organization shows up. So a deeper understanding of that will allow you to deliver value in a sustainable and continuous way.
Very good, Joaquin.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. I'll just add to that in the same vein that this, providing an experience that your patients want is going to be a journey. And so approaching it that way and making good, smart decisions about how you want to do it up front is key, but then also getting those quick wins along the way and just building on top of that, as both Laura and Naveen said, seems like the right way to go.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, that's about all we had time for today. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team. Go to our website to register for upcoming panels. And I want to thank our panel very much, Dr. Naveen Maram, Laura Foltz, and Joaquin Nito. And I want to thank our sponsor, Verado, for making this possible, and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then